Bitter criticism is a new day. I have a lot of news from Russia today. And I'm just gonna read it up right away because I have not all the time in the world. Notable from SPF, this is from Pepe Escobar himself on his Telegram. Maybe this is, I don't know where it's from. I don't remember. But anyway. Notable from the SPF, June 5th, 2024, by Amarit in Pepe Escobar. What? From Pepe Escobar SPF. Russia, Palestine and BRICS, three revolutionary forces changing the world. How can the global majority dethrone the American empire? This question was at the center of an elite roundtable discussion between Russia lawmakers and a delegation of foreign intellectuals on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Here are the main points from that discussion. Multipolarity is necessary since American hegemony fuels global problems instead of solving them by provoking wars and color revolutions. Russia is a revolutionary power at the forefront of history. The Ukraine conflict is helping break down old unipolar world order and replace it with a more just and equitable system. Russia's willingness to defy the West is supported by a majority of the world. Palestine is the litmus test for challenging US imperialism in the Middle East. The conflict has eroded American influence in the Middle East by weakening its main ally in the region, Israel. Palestinian cause is gaining growing support from global South. BRICS is overtaking the UN as the premier international organization. The bloc is headed for a major expansion this year under Russia's chairmanship, with potentially as many as 45 new member states. Well, it's pretty nice. It's a pretty nice synthesis. The most important topic for me is this one. The Ukraine conflict is helping break down all unipolar world order and replace it with a more just and equitable system. I wonder which system is that? Is capitalism? So that's my my bitter criticism. They are replacing capitalism with capitalism. So how to regulate capitalism? That will be the headline, I guess. That's an important headline. How to regulate capitalism? How new is how to build a more just and equitable system? What is that? What is that? So we have old news from May 30, 2024. Home World News. From Rachel Marsden. She's beautiful in this photo. She's my columnist. I didn't find nothing from Timur Fomenko, nothing from Bradley Blankenship. I just read yesterday Fyodor Lukyanov, Pepe Escobar, and so I remember now my fifth columnist. I'm sorry, Rachel. The EU. That's the headline. The EU keeps naive Ukrainians on the hook with more accession talk. Brussels seems to ignore the fact that Ukraine is a corrupt, authoritarian money black hole, all to boost Kiev's morale and keep it fighting Russia. by Marsden, a columnist, political strategist, and host of independently produced talk shows in French and English. RachelMarsden.com. We have a photograph here, file photo of Vladimir Zelensky on the left, greets EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. At the right, at a railway station in Kiev, Ukrainian presidential press service. Quote, the European Union is aiming to start negotiations as early as June 25 on becoming a member of the bloc to help boost Kiev's morale, but has yet to fully overcome objections from Hungary. Bloomberg reported this week more negotiations and a date to actually start these negotiations. Yet another amping up of marriage buzz between the European Union and Ukraine. Not an actual wedding date, though. And here some of us figure that given EU accession talk for Ukraine were approached in December 2023, the talks will have already begun. So now we are learning that they may begin in June. Look, for high-profile couples, which is what Ukraine and the EU will be, it's kind of an unwritten rule that unless you read the wedding announcement with an actual marriage date in New York Times, is not actually a thing. Andrew and Josephine, who holiday at Martha's Vineyard, and those eyes locked across the room at the restaurant on Lake Como, aren't making 200 announcements to the masses that they are headed in the general direction of marriage just as soon as Uncle Victor gets around to giving his blessing, or when the rest of the family can figure out how to trick him into being in the bedroom so he can raise his objection to the union. In this case, Uncle Victor is Hungarian President Viktor Orbán, who literally has out of the room last December, so the other 26 EU member states could vote to begin EU accession talks for Ukraine with the requisite unanimity. As Politico reported at the time, the issue was still deadlocked after 3 hours, and Schulz convinced Orbán that dipping out would be a win-win in the sense that everyone could ram through their approval while Orbán could still say he didn't vote in favor. All Kiev really got out of that were bragging rights about the potential future union. Ask all the other guys who came before how that has turned out. Georgia's parliament can't even pass its own law against foreign interference without the EU low-key threatening to break up with it. European Council President Charles Michel said last month that the law was not consistent with Georgia's EU aspirations and its accession. So confusing because the EU and the West in general is always lecturing about the need to prevent foreign interference. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze even said that if we pass this law, we will ensure this country against polarization and radicalism in the long term. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to become a member of the European Union unless the EU is the one looking to intervene, right? Total gaslighting territory and normally grounds to room for the hills and call off the wedding. If there was an actual date, which there isn't, if you don't like the EU's demands now, just wait until you see the prenup. Turkey has been waiting for a ring as a candidate country since 1999. and is routinely subjected to speculation over whether its chances of ever getting to the altar are now totally dead. Turkey sidelined as EU and prepares to open door to others, wrote Voice of America last year, citing Brussels, ogling of Moldova, and its fawning over Ukraine. It's not like Turkey hasn't gone out of its way to act as Brussels bouncer for all the migrants flooding from Africa and the Middle East and trying to get into Europe. And this is the thanks that it gets. Basically a transactional relationship with no firm date anywhere on the horizon. And speaking of Moldova, the EU apparently isn't thrilled about living in union with Moldova when it still has an estimated 1,500 Russian troops hanging out, making sure that things stay quiet in the separatist enclave of Transnistria. Awkward, particularly when you are trying to put on some moves, especially when a lot of those moves tend to be against Russia. Serbia's constructive relationship with Moscow is seen as a detriment to its own US accession, because Brussels is so insecure that it can handle that Belgrade will have close friends of whom it doesn't approve if they were to get into a formal committed relationship. That's a pretty big red flag, and one of the main hallmark behaviors of control freaks. But then again, we are talking here about an entity headed up by a certain unelected someone who just last week was singing the praises of vaccines for people's minds, which could explain why Brussels also doesn't like the fact that Serbia speaks up and has a mind of its own. European Commissioner Oliver Varhelyi told Serbian President Alexander Vučić earlier this month that Serbia needs to continue with democratic reforms and align its foreign policy more closely with that of EU, according to Euronews. What do all these countries have in common that Ukraine doesn't have, other than the fact that they are being jerked around by Brussels while waiting for any substantial promise? Well, they don't have an active conflict on their territory that constantly evokes fears of World War III, to start with, unlike Ukraine. And they aren't also going to cost the EU a fortune in subsidies the day after the ring goes on the finger, as a European Council document leaked to the Financial Times last year suggests, citing 95.9 billion euros in agricultural subsidies that will mean 20% cuts of farming subsidies to the current farmers who have been protesting a lack of revenues all across the bloc. There is also that niggling issue of corruption. The BBC reports that Ukraine has been ranked at its highest level in the most recent Transparency International Index, published in January, 104th out of 180. Maybe they could just take Ukraine's Eurovision ranking instead. This whole Ukrainian corrupt mafia state was basically connected, getting fucked right now, right? Said former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson top advisor Dominic Cummings in an interview earlier this month. Well, I'm gonna leave here, but no, I'm gonna just one more paragraph. Does the EU seriously think that a country whose president just canceled democratic elections and made in indefinite leader in his marriage material? If so, guess the bar was even lower than even the biggest cynics figure. What about some of these Ukrainian citizens who talk on social media about going to the store to buying bread in Ukraine, only to end up kidnapped by Ukrainian officials and held in a gym for a few days before finding themselves on the battleground, on the battlefront? Totally cool and normal for a potential future EU democracy. But unless Brussels is the type to get drunk and run away and elope with the biggest head case on their dance card and seal a deal that's destined Brussels, that destined to end in tears, it's kind of pointless getting too excited every time Brussels starts rhetorically love bombing Kiev. So why do they even bother doing it when they don't do this with the other candidate countries, at least not to anywhere near the same extent? To boost Kiev's morale, as Bloomberg pointed out, presumably to offset Ukrainians dying on a daily basis, just so the West can continue to avoid any peaceful resolution whose terms it can dictate. If Zelensky doesn't come to his senses soon, as with anyone being strung along, it can only end in tears. The statements, views, and opinions expressed in this column are solely those of the author and not necessarily represent those of Russia today. Well, anyway, Rachel Marsden is kind of how to say farandula in English, is famous celebrities, isn't it? Anyway, so more news. June 6, 2024, home Russia and former Soviet Union. Ukraine not allowed to attack Kremlin with US supplied missiles. Biden. So Biden doesn't allow Ukraine to attack Kremlin with US supplied missiles. The scope of strikes with American-made weapons must be limited to military positions in Russian border areas, the president has claimed. We have a file photo, US President Joe Biden. Washington has not authorized Ukraine to use US supplied missiles to attack targets deep inside Russia, including Moscow, President Joe Biden has said. These comments come after the US permitted Kiev to carry out cross-border strikes on Russian soil using American-made weapons. In an interview with ABC News on Thursday, Biden confirmed that Ukraine is allowed to use US-made weapons for strike inside Russia, but claimed Kiev can launch them only in proximity to the border when the Russian weapons are being used on the other side of the border to attack specific targets in Ukraine. We are not authorizing strikes 200 miles into Russia, and we are not authorizing strikes on Moscow, on the Kremlin, Biden stressed. Russia has already accused Ukraine of attempting to attack the Kremlin last May. At the time, Russian officials claimed that 2 Ukrainian drones had been neutralized in the heart of Moscow, adding that the unsuccessful attack was interpreted as an assassination attempt to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Biden confirmed in the interview that he is concerned about Putin's response to the shift in US policy on cross-border strikes. The Russian president earlier called the decision a confirmation of Western nations' direct participation in the war. Quote, "I've known him for over 40 years. He's concerned for me for 40 years," the American president said, proceeding to label his Russian counterpart a dictator and not a decent man. Biden has insulted Putin on several occasions before, with the jabs denounced by the Kremlin as shameful. The US decision to allow Ukraine to conduct limited strikes into Russia was reported by several Western media outlets last week and was later confirmed by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It came on the heels of Russian offensive in the border Kharkov region, which has resulted in Kiev's troops being pushed back, as well as reported concerns in the White House that Moscow might capture Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkov. On Wednesday, Putin condemned the US and other NATO members for supplying Ukraine with long-range missiles that could be used for strikes deep into Russian territory, warning that the move marks a significant escalation in the conflict and could backfire on the West. In particular, he suggested that Moscow could opt for an asymmetric response and send similar weapons to parts of the world where they could be used against sensitive sides of the country supporting Ukraine. But in my opinion, I guess all this turmoil, I'm not sure now, but I guess in my opinion is just cooling down, maybe. Of course, I'm not sure. Nobody knows, but I guess the worst is behind, because the Ukraine will not strike Russia territory. That's important, That's a win for everybody. Even here in Chile, I mean, I don't know, everything will not be so so expensive, as it was in war. Imagine a war. So everything will be unbelievable costly for if there will be war. June 6, 2024, Homeworld News. Give them an inch, they will take a mile. Why red lines on Western weapons are crucial for Russia. NATO is trying to shift the Ukraine conflict into Russia, and the lack of a response will be seen as a sign of weakness. I didn't get nothing from this headline. It is by Badra Kumar, a retired Indian diplomat who has served in Russia, South Korea, Sri Lanka, West Germany, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan before ultimately retiring as an Indian ambassador to Turkey. We have a photograph from Vladimir Putin. On May 31, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that the Biden administration decision to allow Ukraine to use Western weapons to hit targets in what Washington considers Russian territory. This week, Russian President Vladimir Putin reiterated his country's red lines in this regard, promising an asymmetric response without providing specific details. President Biden stopped Ukraine from using ballistic missiles. The attack will also be restricted to the Kharkov sector, allowing Kiev to strike military targets, gun positions, as well as transshipment bases that Russia uses to create a kind of buffer zone, as a White House official put it. But as Americans often say, all options are on the table. Blinken succinctly stated on the sidelines of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Prague on May 31. The hallmark of our engagement has been to adapt and adjust as necessary to meet what's actually going on the battlefield, to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs when it needs it to that deliberately and effectively. And that's exactly what we are doing in response. What we are doing in response to what we are now seeing in and around Kharkov region. The key words are adapt and adjust as necessary. They message that this isn't a standalone decision, but part of a process, nor it is limited to all time in geographical terms to Kharkov region's border with Russia. Blinken ignored the Kremlin's warnings, but unmistakably hinted that this was just the beginning. The underlying logic is to keep increasing the cost of for Russia as a potential deterrent to force it to bend when costs outweigh the benefits. Washington is pleased that more and more NATO countries are speaking out in favor of officially allowing Ukraine to strike with its weapons on Russian territory. Notably, on May 31, Germany confirmed the possibility that its weapons could be used near Kharkov region. Washington seems confident that Moscow, as so often in the past, will get to accept the new normal. Nonetheless, Blinken underscored that going forward, we all continue to do what we have been doing, which is as necessary, adapt and adjust. And that, as I said, has been a hallmark for our engagement. It will continue to be. So it is entirely conceivable that at a future date, sooner rather than later, ATACMS may be included in Kiev's inventory to hit Russian territory, especially if the Russian offensive expands in scope. Jeremy Bowen, a BBC international television presenter, wrote this week after a trip to Ukraine that most Western analysts think the Kremlin is bluffing when it rattles the nuclear saber. China, Russia's essentially ally, has made it clear it does not want any use of nuclear weapons. He argued, there is some merit in such an argument. At any rate, Blinken simply ignored the sensitive issue of tactical nuclear weapons, but asserted that NATO will not be cowed. The US, look, don't know this word, cowed. But assert that NATO will not be cowed. Like cow, yeah. The US has a counter strategy, which includes bilateral talks with Ukraine in the coming weeks to expedite long-term security arrangements. Plans are also afoot to take concrete steps at the forthcoming NATO summit in Washington in July to bring Ukraine closer to NATO and ensure that there is a bridge to membership. A bridge that's strong and well lit. So what I was reading tell me that I was wrong. So this very article from this very day says it could be World War III. But I'm worried about the prices, the escalation of prices, I forgot the word. Inflation. Yeah, that will be. I will study that. You know, I'll try to find some articles, but definitely, I guess there is a lot of inflation during wartime, isn't it? here we go to the studio. To the studio. All right, we made it. The last obstacle, the carton, the carton. Look, we will do for that hole. I guess I will. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. All right. So just keep reading. Yeah. So Russia today is being great. Russia today is being great. That will be the headline. If I don't remember nothing better. But there is some merit in such an argument. At any rate, Blinken simply ignored the sensitive issue of tactical nuclear weapons, but asserted that NATO will not be cowed. I guess it's because of cow. NATO will not be cowed. Like, will not be cattle. I guess. The US has a counter strategy which includes bilateral talks with Ukraine in the coming weeks to expedite long-term security arrangements. Plans are also afoot to take concrete steps at the forthcoming NATO summit in Washington in July to bring Ukraine closer to NATO and ensure that there's a bridge to membership. A bridge that's strong and well lit. Blinken stressed that NATO will have a key role to build Ukraine's future force, and the Washington summit will advance the country's integration into the alliance. Biden, however, later said in an interview that NATO membership for Ukraine is not necessarily as part of his vision for peace. Well, Biden talk a lot of shit, You cannot... Well, Biden is just a puppet. It doesn't matter what the hell Biden says, I guess. Speaking to the press on Monday, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby disclosed that Washington has so far only given Kiev permission to use American weapons to hit targets in the part of Russia bordering Ukraine's Kharkov region. But won't rule out the further loosening of restrictions and expanding the geography of such cross-border strikes. Kirby was up from that while the policy with respect to prohibiting the use of ATACMS or long-range strikes inside of Russia had not changed. He wouldn't rule out any additional policy changes, which depend on the battlefield situation and where things go and what the Ukrainians need. We are not going to turn our back on what Ukraine needs, and we are going to continue to try to again evolve our support to them as the battlefield evolves as well. Kirby said, plainly put, if Russian operations intensify or expand in scope, or ironically meet his success, all bets are off. From Kirby's remarks, it seems Biden may have taken a decision already in this regard. All things taken into consideration, the US has thrown down the gauntlet to Moscow. It has completely funged the core issue, namely that highly skilled NATO specialists are doing the target selection for Kiev, which in turn will be drawing upon the alliance's pool of reconnaissance data, and secondly, the attack on Russian territory may even be without the participation of the Ukrainian military. Simply put, there are no pretensions anymore about the NATO raring to take on Russia. In response, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Kyabkov has once again warned the US against miscalculations that could have fatal consequences, and called on Washington to take Russia's warnings with the utmost seriousness. But such reasoning will be falling on deaf ears. In fact, French President Emmanuel Macron is expected to announce any day the deployment of French military instructors to Ukraine. France hopes to lead a European coalition of the willing in this regard. The US and NATO are not currently considering the option of sending military trainers to Ukraine, but are thinking about the possible role of coordination of training. All in all, during the past 10 days, since NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg broke the ceiling in an interview with The Economist on May 25, obviously with Washington's prior concurrence, that Ukraine should be allowed to use Western supplies weapons in strikes against military targets inside Russia, and called on members to consider whether they should lift the current restrictions. There has been a spectacular display of the Western Alliance wading deeper into the war. What emerged on May 31 is Plan B to transfer the locus of the war to Russian territory. This poses a tough call for Moscow, as its red lines have fallen by the wayside. Procrastination will be construed as weakness and may embolden nature to further up the end. This is an existential war, and there is no alternative to Russia pressing ahead with the creation of an effective buffer zone, no matter the costs. The statements, views, and opinions expressed in this column are solely those of the author and do not necessarily represent those of Russia today. So, I was wrong, I guess. I was thinking that maybe I'm living these days too intensely, because part of me want the global north destroy all down, like all the global north destroy themselves, and another part is worried about inflation. So what about that? Inflation, World War III. Will World War III will do any good for us in Global South? June 6, 2024, Home World News. SPF 2024, Russia-China relations at their highest level, envoy says. The two countries have been expanding cooperation despite global challenges, China's ambassador to Moscow has said. File photo, Shang Hanui, China's ambassador to Moscow, Sputnik. Cooperation between Russia and China is stable and predictable despite the complicated global environment and associated challenges, Shang Hanui, China's ambassador to Moscow, has said. Speaking on Thursday at a panel discussion on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, SPF, the envoy emphasized that China-Russia relations have reached the highest point on their development amid turbulent times. Our relationship is very close, based on a mutual respect and frankness. It is a model of international relations for the whole world, Zhang stated, adding that the two nations will continue to expand cooperation. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Moscow and Beijing. Shang said China is Russia's main trade and economic partner. supplying consumer electronics, mechanical engineering, cars, and so on. Russian products, including chocolate, ice cream, and other food products, are also being supplied to the Chinese market. Mutual trade turnover has been soaring, exceeding $240 billion, target ahead of schedule, he said. Not he, but anybody, Shang, not Xi Jinping, he said. Zhang recalled that the special economic platform has been established to boost trade and encourage Chinese enterprises and companies to invest in Russia and vice versa. Held in the northeastern Chinese city of Harbin from May 17 to 21, the 8th Expo was extended by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The annual event serves as a major platform for economic partnership, promoting business opportunities, investment, and technology exchange. Shang added that despite certain difficulties, both sides intend to continue strengthening ties. We should find all the potential opportunities and, in every possible way, facilitate their development, the Chinese envoy concluded. And I guess I'm gonna read just the headlines now, because I'm gonna read. Look, June 6, Russia Today, home India. India, the second biggest foreign threat to Canada, report. Biggest foreign threat. Why? Ottawa has put New Delhi on its foreign interference list along with Beijing and Moscow. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the right shakes hands with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit in New Delhi on September 9, 2023. What a fakery, isn't it? Justin Trudeau fakery. What a shame. Anyway, India is the second biggest foreign threat to Canadian democracy after China, a high-level parliamentary panel has claimed it. Russia, which had occupied the second position in a 2019 report, now occupies the third spot in the list. The report was released by Canada's National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, NSICOP, comprising MPs and prime ministers and senators with top security clearances. The committee named two more Asian nations, Pakistan and Iran, that it claims threaten to undermine the country's democracy. The NSICOP explained that New Delhi has been moved to the top 3 on the list as it had targeted Canadian politicians, ethnic media, and Indo-Canadian ethno-cultural communities. The development comes amid an ongoing diplomatic rout between Ottawa and New Delhi that erupted last year after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau alleged the government of India was involved in the killing near Vancouver of Hardeep Singh Niyar, a Sikh separatist activist and supporter of the Khalistan movement. I have no idea. Well, all this is interesting because right here in Chile, something like that happened, but I'm not sure what happened. I guess somebody. The question is, the matter is, the news is, some Venezuelan official, the people, this is what the right wing says, in Chile. You never can, you better never trust nothing from Chile. They said Venezuelan government killed somebody in Chile. That's it. And well, it's funny because I don't remember nothing like that, but this is the espionage world anyway. So I hope nobody killed me, I'm just reading news. I'm just a English student, that's it. Italian citizenship, Italian citizen. I hope the world peace. I didn't said I want World War III. Was not me, you know. Anyway, I like women. I'm straight. I just want peace and love with hot women. Anyway, the movement which seeks the creation of a separate Khalistan nation state to be carved out of India has been outlawed by New Delhi. India repeatedly denied the Canadian allegations and has sought proof from Trudeau's government. Tensions between the two nations flared yet again last month after Trudeau attended a rally in Toronto where several attendees chanted pro-Khalistan slogans. Later, India's Ministry of External Affairs summoned the Canadian Deputy High Commissioner over the matter. According to the ministry, its deep concern and strong protest was conveyed at such disturbing actions being allowed to continue unchecked at the event. Last month, Canada arrested 3 Indian citizens in connection with last year's assassination. The suspects, Kamalpreet Singh and Karampreet Singh, had been living as non-permanent residents in Alberta, Canada for 3 or 5 years, according to Canadian police. Earlier this year, Ottawa also investigated. And well, I'm gonna leave here because Tommy have to go. Well, pretty interesting though. Go, Tommy. Go, you're Indian. But don't be separatist, Tommy. Very interesting actually. This latest news. But I guess Canada is doing this just because of geopolitics. They are trying to separate India. Definitely. I guess that's my opinion. Canada is not such a nice country. They are westernized. They are G7, so they are fighting against BRICS. That's it.